Good evening, everyone. I'm Mary Pat Higgins. I'm the president and CEO of the Dallas Holocaust and Human Rights Museum, and I'm so grateful that you all joined us tonight for the third and final session of this year's Crucial Conversation series on challenging anti-Semitism. I'd like to start by thanking our generous sponsors for tonight's program, Ronit and Haviv Ilan. We're truly grateful for your support. Please help me thank them. I'd also like to recognize our incredible community partners for this series, ADL Texoma, Congregation Amshe Torah, Dallas After School, Green Hill School, Jewish Federation of Greater Dallas, Southwest Jewish Congress, Temple Emmanuel, Temple Shalom, and the Texas Holocaust, Genocide, and Anti-Semitism Advisory Commission. Thank you all for partnering with us and for just being with us on this journey. And thank you to our youngest member in the audience. It's you're never too young to start learning about this stuff, so thanks for being here. I'd also like to give a warm welcome to our board members, our museum members, and our volunteers. Your unwavering commitment makes what we do possible day in and day out, and we're very, very grateful. If you're here and you're not a member or you'd like to get engaged and become a volunteer, please come talk to me afterwards or go to our website and check out all of our resources. We'd love for you to be part of our family. In 2020, we started the Crucial Conversation series to discuss and address a pervasive issue in our country. At that time, we started with racism. This year, the second time we have done so with this series, we are challenging anti-Semitism, a complex, ugly, and deeply rooted hatred that has existed for millennia and underlies much of the content in our Holocaust Shoah wing in the museum's permanent exhibition. As a Holocaust and Human Rights Museum, we are intimately familiar with the historical consequences of anti-Semitism, which is fueled by hatred, racism, conspiratorial thinking, and scapegoating, to name just a few of its causes. Attacks on Jews, both verbal and physical, are reported daily across the world and have been growing over the past decade or more. We are heartbroken by the recent spate of anti-Jewish violence, including the targeted murder of 2 Israeli embassy staff members in Washington, D.C., and the savage attack in Boulder, Colorado, on peaceful protesters calling for the release of Jewish hostages held by Hamas. We cannot be complacent in the face of rising, virulent anti-Semitism. We must condemn anti-Semitism by speaking out and standing up for Jews in our country and around the world. And tonight, we will close this series by discussing concrete strategies that we can all use to combat current-day anti-Semitism. It's never been more important. Please keep in mind that this series is not meant to be a conversation about the ongoing and long-standing issues between the Israelis and Palestinians, nor about a specific Israeli administration. Our goal for this series is to educate our community about contemporary anti-Semitism, which was exacerbated by Hamas's attack on Israel on October 7th, 2023, but it certainly did not begin then. We will have time for questions at the end of tonight's program, so please use the note cards that you should have received as you came into the auditorium. Write your questions down, and our volunteers will come around and collect them, and we'll do our best to answer as many as possible. I'd also like to ask you now to silence your cell phones and electronic devices, so we may listen to our speakers without disruption. So finally, I get to do the fun part. I am pleased to introduce our esteemed speakers who are with us this evening. The Honorable Kenneth L. Marcus is the founder and chairman of a leading civil rights legal organization fighting against anti-Semitism, the Louis D. Brandeis Center for Human Rights Under Law. During his public service career, Marcus served as Assistant U.S. Secretary of Education for Civil Rights, Staff Director at the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights, and General Deputy Assistant U.S. Secretary of Housing and Urban Development for Fair Housing and Equal Opportunity. Lisa Katz serves as the Chief Government Affairs Officer for the Combat Antisemitism movement, where she leads strategic partnerships with mayors and municipal leaders to combat antisemitism and promote tolerant communities. She began as a corporate and securities attorney in New York City, later specializing in estate planning and elder law. A graduate of both the Wharton School and the University of Pennsylvania's College of Arts and Sciences, Katz also holds a JD from Fordham Law School. Experienced attorney James Pash serves as the Vice President of Litigation for the Anti-Defamation League, or ADL, leading their legal advocacy efforts to combat anti-Semitism and extremism. Prior to leading national litigation efforts, he served as the ADL's Cleveland Regional Director and drove the region's response in the aftermath of the Tree of Life synagogue attack in Pittsburgh. Pash holds a BA from the University of Vermont and a JD from Case Western Reserve University School of Law. And last but not least, our moderator this evening is our very own Dr. Sarah Abosh Jacobson, the Barbara Rabin Chief Education Officer at the Dallas Holocaust and Human Rights Museum, where she is responsible for all content-related matters. Dr. Abosh Jacobson holds a PhD in modern European and Jewish history and master's degrees in modern British history and political science from the University of Buffalo. As you can see, we have a very impressive panel tonight, and it's my honor to turn the conversation over to Sarah.
Thank you, Mary Pat, and thank you all for joining us this evening. I am actually very much looking forward to this conversation. I think it's going to be quite interesting. So I'm going to start by repeating a little bit of what Mary Pat just said, because I want to kind of lay the framework for where we sit and stand at the moment. And that's to address the wave of recent anti-Semitic attacks here in the United States. In the last 2 months, a man has set fire to the Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro's official residence after the first night of Passover. The governor and his family were in the residence when this happened. 2 Israeli embassy aides were shot and killed in Washington, D.C., leaving a young professionals event at the Capitol Jewish Museum. And most recently in Boulder, Colorado, which I think we'll speak to a few times tonight at least, 15 Jews peacefully participating in their weekly walk for the return of Hamas's hostages in Gaza suffered burns when a man threw Molotov cocktails at them. So the first is kind of a softball question, but let's start a little lighter, and then we'll proceed from there. What I would ask from all of you first is, what are your thoughts about these events? And what conclusions, if any, can we draw from them about the state of anti-Semitism and Jewish life in America today? And then we'll proceed to talk about Boulder. For this first, Ken, we'll start with you, and then Lisa, and then James, and then we'll round robin. So Ken, please.
Sure, Sarah. Thank you for the introduction, Sarah and Mary, and for the ability to be here in person now to this great museum. It tells us we have a pattern. It tells us that we are in a time of great danger. It tells us that there is no particular area that's safe. It tells us that the problems that we've seen on the campus are not just limited to the campus, and it tells us that some of the ugly speech that we've been hearing is not unrelated to the kinds of ugly conduct of which people are capable. I think what we're now seeing is a continuation and perhaps acceleration of a problem that some of us have been fighting for quite some time. And it really tells us that we need to redouble our efforts to address it.
Thank you. Lisa.
So I echo everything that Ken said, and thank you also for having me here today. I think what it also tells us is that all this rhetoric we're hearing is now becoming dangerous, and we're seeing a progression and escalation of words now into action. And slogans like globalize the Intifada are no longer just slogans. You know, there are people who are taking this to heart and actually trying to kill Jews simply for the sake of killing Jews. And it's something that we need to fight every day on every level of government. I think every person needs to make sure to stand up and not to let this be normalized anymore. Because if we do, it's only going to get worse, and we can't wait for the next act to happen because it'll be too late.
James?
You know, I think when we think about the events that culminated over the last several weeks that you just mentioned, I think the unfortunate reality for probably all of us sitting up here is we were horrified but not shocked. Right? There wasn't an element of surprise. And we have been beating that drum now for many years. You know, I think back to my days as a regional director before being in the litigation role. And in my 4 years as regional director covering 4 states, each year we broke the prior year's historical record for most anti-Semitic events that the region had ever seen. Right? And that was in a pre-October 7th landscape. And everyone here knows the fuel that was added to the fire in the post-10/7 landscape with the historic rise of anti-Semitism in this country. And so for many of us as Jews in America, we had already felt a tectonic shift under our feet and how Jews were being treated from coast to coast and everywhere in between. And the violent events of the last few months affirm that understanding that we're living in a very different reality in this nation that we have lived in recent memory. And it's going to require an all of society approach to tackle the fight against anti-Semitism, and it's going to require Jews and non-Jews alike to come together and say, enough. We cannot tolerate violence in this nation. We cannot tolerate people being targeted for who they are.
Thank you. In this one, we're going to talk a little bit about Boulder, but there's 3 parts to this question. I'm going to ask each one of you a different part, but please, if there's something that your co-panelist does not address that you would like to, by all means. And this time we'll start with you, Ken. So the suspect in the Boulder attack is in jail, thank goodness, and he's facing a federal hate crime charge, multiple state charges of attempted murder, and even 1 charge of animal cruelty. There was a dog who was burned as well, somebody's dog. Do you have any predictions for how his sentencing and trial might proceed? And I know we're kind of asking you to use a crystal ball, but these things do play out in the courts and in the court of public opinion. So there's 2 things going on here.
So he does look pretty guilty to me.
Good to know.
I think what I'm going to be looking out for is whether the investigation finds evidence of connection to others or not. I think that's what's going to be interesting, and also the extent to which we're seeing copycat crimes between now and then. One of the frightening aspects of these things is that when people see a crime of this sort, the reaction is not always to be horrified, as James pointed out, but sometimes to be inspired. So one hopes that the reaction to this matter is a combination of understanding, investigation, and then finding out the connections, and then conviction.
Lisa, do you think that these attacks, not just the Boulder attacks, but starting with Governor Shapiro and moving forward from there, they came in very rapid succession? Do you think that they will change how Americans view anti-Semitism and how they respond to anti-Semitism? Also, do you think they will change how law enforcement responds? And I'm thinking particularly we had here in the Dallas area in Colleyville a hostage situation with Rabbi Charlie Citron and several of his congregation members. And at the time, the FBI agent said this is not an anti-Semitic attack. And in Boulder, there was a similar where the governor, Governor Polis said, no, this was a hate crime. Kash Patel, the head of the FBI, said this was most definitely a hate crime, and the Boulder police said, we're not sure what this was. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, that's a lot.
I know.
So in terms of people viewing anti-Semitism, no, I don't think it's changing, other than I think some people are waking up to realize, wow, this is worse than we thought it was. And I think there are people who were comfortable staying silent who maybe aren't going to stay quite as silent anymore. I think, though, law enforcement, I think it will change. And I think it's incumbent upon, first, all municipal law enforcement, actually not just municipal, but in state and federal government as well, must be trained on the modern symbols of anti-Semitism. Because I think, you know, it used to be, oh, a swastika, okay, that's anti-Semitic. Now it's a watermelon. And, you know, we're entering the summer, there's gonna be a lot of watermelons. And I think that it's really incumbent upon law enforcement to understand, you know what, we're seeing red triangles on buildings all of a sudden, what does that mean? And to just be much more aware, I think, of anti-Semitic symbols to try to stop some of these actions before they happen. I am also seeing, obviously, you know, today there's much more security around these events. I think people are starting to take it more seriously. I think it's very important that it's something that's going to be defined, like the IRA definition of anti-Semitism, for instance. So then you can't fight something unless you can define what it is. And I think once it's defined and that works through every municipality, every state, the federal government, then that can be incorporated into hate crime statutes. It can be incorporated into any DEI initiatives, so that anytime there is any sort of violence or rhetoric against Jews, all of a sudden it now is a hate crime, and it will take on a greater import. I think for some reason, you know, fill in the blank with any other marginalized group and people would be up in arms, but when it was the Jews, nobody says anything, and I am starting to see that shift a little bit.
Okay, that was going to be my question to you as part of this, and then we'll come to you, James.
You're
No.
all good. I
James,
can build on.
James is okay. No, Lisa, you said that you didn't think it was going to change Americans' views of anti-Semitism and how to respond to it. You think it's not going to change? In other words,
Me still, or?
yeah, because it was part of the question we were talking about.
I think that most Americans, despite what you're seeing on college campuses, despite what you're seeing from very radicalized individuals, I think most people in America think anti-Semitism and hate crimes are wrong. I think that's not going to change. I do think that you are going to have more people starting to speak up because they're seeing the violence. I think it was very easy to kind of say, yeah, that's not good, but not to really speak up. And I do think you're going to start to see a little bit of a shift and have people start to, you know, say, no, you know what, this is no longer okay.
Thank you. James, so this is to follow up a little bit on what Ken was alluding to, but do you think that these attacks are in any way connected? And beyond the claims of each attacker, because they all had very similar claims, which is they're acting in solidarity with the Palestinian people or from a desire to kill Zionists or Israelis. So again, it's a crystal ball kind of question. But.
Yeah. Look, I'll start off with the basic premise of we have to allow federal law enforcement to do their job and conduct a thorough investigation into each attack as an individual attack and to reach a conclusion based on facts and nothing more and nothing less, right? We have to allow law enforcement to do their job. You know, it would be naive, though, to say that we are not living in an environment where there's motivation and encouragement. And, you know, we, building on something that Ken said about, you know, I think we all pretty much know, right, who committed, where the facts will lead for each of those attacks, most recently the Boulder one. But when we start pulling the thread of what happened after those attacks, right? So in Boulder, you have a video from the attacker that's almost immediately put on Telegram and shared with tens of thousands of individuals across the globe. In Washington, you have a manifesto that is almost immediately allowed to be posted on X, and as of yesterday, was still publicly available 2 weeks later, right? And so we can't have a conversation about the rise of anti-Semitic violence without talking about the role that social media and the internet is playing in the perpetuation of hate. It's palpable. And so when we say loosely, is there a connection, right? I mean, we have to let the facts take us where the facts are for each individual attacker and attack, and let justice be done through law enforcement. But it's up to us to try to figure out how to work with greater society to tamp down on the spread of anti-Semitism and lies and libel, et cetera, in order to prevent the next attacks from occurring.
And I love the lawyerly caution and the way all three of you, I appreciate that, the way, good.
It's like we've been trained.
I know, it's amazing. What I'd like to do now is turn briefly to talk about America's colleges and universities. And we just had a session last month on this, so this will be a smaller question. Virtually all institutions of higher education willingly accept federal funds, which come with strings attached, as do all government grants and aid packages. In an effort to bring to a halt campus anti-Semitic rhetoric, protests, violence, etc., the Trump administration has moved to arrest foreign student protesters, many of whom have legal U.S. visas, and to cut off billions in federal dollars. So there's three parts here, and I'll start with you, James, and then Lisa, and then Ken, because Ken's question will end in D.C., so I think that works well. James, do you think these measures are legal and or effective ways to stop campus anti-Semitism? In other words, cutting or yanking funds.
I mean, I see you start. You gave Ken the softball question. You kidding me? Look, first and foremost, I think we have to level set about, in order to have a conversation about what actions are being taken concerning anti-Semitism on campus, we have to level set about what is actually happening on campus, right? And the reality is it started before October 7th, but it became very clear in the immediate aftermath of the October 7th terrorist attack that our college students were bearing the brunt of anti-Semitism on campus. And I'm not talking about having, Jewish students having to hear chants as they walk to class. I'm talking about, ADL and Brandeis Center together, representing college students who have been violently assaulted on campus, punched in the face, right, broken noses and jaws, and concussed and in the hospital for no other reason other than being a Jew on campus. Right? And universities have an obligation, a legal obligation, to create an environment where Jewish students are able to live, work, and play free of harassment and discrimination, period. And they have the ability to do that and still uphold the values of the First Amendment. It is indeed possible and mandatory to do both. And so when we talk about action against universities and colleges, right, all the actions taken should be grounded in the law, right? There should be investigations to address anti-Semitism on campus. And if there's clear violations and a lack of a correction, then in extreme circumstances, one of the things that Title VI has available to it is the withholding of federal funds, right? If universities are unwilling to change, But it is crucial at the same time that, because you talked about funding, but you also talked about the second part of your question was about deportations, right? And student visas, right? If there are students that are taking or part of conduct that is in violation of their visas, then there needs to be due process. There needs to be consideration about what to do. But there is also a difference between conduct and speech, right? It is important that we, in the furtherance of safety and security, that we don't also abandon the bedrock principles of our Constitution. And we could do both. Just the way that universities are required to do both, we could do both. And so whether it's federal funding, whether it's deportations, there are going to be circumstances where those prongs are met and circumstances where they are not met. And we should use the law and the Constitution as our guiding light, and we should leave no stone unturned in fighting for the protection of Jewish students on campus. We cannot lose sight of that. Jewish students are under threat on college campuses, and they deserve our protection under the law.
Lisa, do you think these actions, the pulling of funds and the yanking of visas, do you think they set a dangerous precedent, or are they necessary and justified? And I think that James was kind of getting to it, but I would like to hear your views on this as well.
So I can come at it two ways. So first, as a mother, I will tell you that my daughter, when she was in college, was the president of Hillel. After October 7th, the SJP on campus put out a hit list of students who should be attacked on campus simply because they're Jewish. And my daughter was on the very top of that list. So when I hear something like that, and then I hear, is it justified? Well, I will say yes, because I think, to your point, every college student should be protected, should be able to receive the education that they paid for, that they deserve, without worrying about being attacked or threatened just because of who they are. And I will say, I have approached universities, especially hers, and said, what are you going to do? And their initial response was, well, she can call campus security if she feels uncomfortable walking to class. And I said, that is not an answer, but you're seeing that answer in so many universities. I mean, I'm from New York. Look at Columbia University. I mean, I wouldn't send my kid there if you paid me to send them there. It's just a cesspool of anti-Semitism with an administration that's not doing anything about it. And so, unfortunately, I think that while I don't want to say it's necessary, because I feel that the administration should be able to protect their students and allow everyone equal access to an education without fear of being intimidated or worse, I do think that sometimes pocketbooks talk, and sometimes it can be an effective means if you can't approach it any other way. That being said, I do think that there's a very fine line to walk between free speech and hate speech, and what is protected speech and what isn't. And I certainly understand that universities are a time. I remember, I'm going to date myself, but we were protesting against apartheid when I was in college, and we weren't attacking anyone, but that's the time when kids are finding themselves and learning things. I mean, I wish there was a little more critical thinking in colleges now. I'm not seeing it, but so I think universities are in a funny spot to make sure that they're balancing the right to free speech versus the right for students to access a free education, but 100% saying globalize the intifada, attacking kids, having kids need to be locked in libraries, or being, unable to get to classes, or walking down the college campus and being surrounded because they're wearing a Jewish star or a kippah and worried about being attacked and harassed, that's not free speech. And I think that if colleges can't figure out how to do this themselves, I do support the states and the federal government getting involved.
So Ken, as the kind of third part of this question, are there, do you think, other avenues open to the executive branch or to the states to affect the desired changes on campuses?
There absolutely are, and for us as well. So let me give you three parts to that. First, holding institutions accountable. This was the original plan I developed over 20 years ago while at the Education Department. The notion is that any institution that receives federal funds can be held accountable if they fail to comply with federal civil rights laws. So that's much of what we're seeing now with the Trump task force going after places like Columbia and Harvard. It's also what some of us are doing, the Brandeis Center, sometimes with ADL, going after these universities either before the executive branch or in court. More needs to be done. I'm glad that HHS, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, is starting to get involved too, but they need to do more. Have you heard of decolonizing therapy or decolonial therapy? Right, that's a movement in mental health now that defines Zionism as a mental illness. Federal funds are supporting this sort of thing. There should be no more federal funding whatsoever for decolonizing therapy. So that, zero. That's holding institutions accountable. Second is holding perpetrators accountable. An example where suing on behalf of the janitors who were assaulted at Hamilton Hall in Columbia University, suing the individuals who went after them, the individuals who occupied Hamilton Hall and who assaulted these janitors. We can find them, we can identify, we can sue them, we can make them pay. That's the Trump administration deporting some of these folks. There are more individuals we can go after. Third is disrupting the organizations that are behind this, that are funding it, that are organizing it. One of the things that's come out of the Columbia case is this understanding that many of the protests were not organic, student-driven, or volunteer. They were put together by outside organizations, by paid professional organizers, who in meticulous detail mapped out what should be done, literally developing military-type maps showing potential protesters what are the locations on every floor of the building of any object sufficiently heavy to serve as a barricade, what doors and windows needed to be barricaded, how can food and materials be transported in and out of the building. They're fighting a war. We think it's a First Amendment activity. It's not a First Amendment activity. When they're fighting, we need to fight back. So we have three different things. We need to hold the institutions accountable, we have to hold the individuals accountable, and we have to disrupt the organization and funding.
Thank you. This next question, we're gonna go again, James, Lisa, and Ken. So all of your organizations educate others on anti-Semitism. You track anti-Semitism in one form or another, incidents, and you do deal with reports on them, and you make statements when attacks occur, and you pursue legal measures. You're lawyers, that's what you do. So to stop anti-Semitism and to advocate for policy changes when you can. James, how does the ADL track and analyze reports of anti-Semitic activity, and how does the ADL use this data in its educational, legal, and advocacy efforts?
I mean, I could talk about that for an hour, but
You have about 2 minutes.
Look, we have been tracking anti-Semitic incidents of assault, harassment, and vandalism in this country year in and year out, every year since the 1960s. Right? We release an audit report every spring detailing the prior year's incidents. We have a map called a heat map online where you could track to the municipality every type of incident that occurs. Right? That's incidents, I should clarify, that we know about, because they're either reported into ADL or they're publicly available for us to record. We have a whole incident response portal where people report into ADL. We combine that with our Center of Anti-Semitism Research, where we have researchers who are researching anti-Semitic attitudes and public opinion polls and how people are identifying with certain terms and how that informs our educational programs or where our educational programs are falling short, right? And we have to understand through both the statistics as well as the public surveys what is working and what isn't working in the fight against anti-Semitism, right? It's incumbent upon all of us in the Jewish community to sit back and say, okay, we're tracking significant seismic growth. What hasn't worked, and what do we have to do a better job at? Right? When I was a regional director, I'd always say we do three things extraordinarily well for the last 100 years. We educate, we advocate, and we investigate. Now I say we educate, advocate, investigate, and litigate, right? Because sometimes you need to use the long arms of the law to do exactly what Ken just talked about, right? To provide redress to victims, hold people accountable, and to change the narrative, right? We launched ADL litigation for that reason, right? We have filed more cases in the last 18 months than the prior 100 years combined. Right? That's a massive change of strategy. We went from signing amicus briefs to affirmative litigation. And that was in a pre-10-7 landscape, but it was intentional, and it was a change that was made based on facts on the ground, right? Using the data, using the facts, and figuring out where we had to go, partnering with like-minded organizations across the board so that we together as a Jewish community have the impact necessary to change the paradigm.
Lisa, you are with the Combat Antisemitism movement, so CAM, and you have partnerships that encompass hundreds and hundreds of interfaith organizations. You have a network of more than 5 million activists at the grassroots level online, so there's that social media component as well. I want you to do two things now, please. One is to speak to the power of partnership and how CAM goes about using and engaging this network of allies. And as part of that, I think that what you were doing yesterday in Boulder is the perfect way to kind of illustrate this. So not everybody knows, Lisa was in Boulder yesterday for the Boulder Emergency Summit with the mayor and community members, and she can talk about how that was just kismet that she ended up being there at that time. But can you talk about how CAM approaches these types of situations and how it engages the allies in the aftermath of attacks like these?
I can try. So not one of our groups up here or the many, many others that are trying to fight anti-Semitism are going to do it alone. None of us will succeed alone. So it's very important to CAM, to me, that we partner with organizations like the Brandeis Center, like ADL, to make sure, like interfaith initiatives, and I'll get into Boulder to illustrate this, but there are so many fronts to fight this on, and so many avenues that we need to take, and kind of my illustration was, we're all trying to fight this in our own lanes, but unless we try to carpool, nothing's ever going to happen. So, we did the largest ever summit of pro-Israel, pro-Jew influencers in the world. So we work with people like Montana Tucker and so many to try to go on that front to battle social media. We work with Muslim leaders. We work with Christian leaders. We work with so many other religious groups to make sure we're confronting it on that level. We partner with all the other organizations that are in this space to try to get our word out and to work on every avenue that we can. So, all right. So one thing that wasn't in my bio that was read. So I was also in public office for 10 years as a mayor, as a town councilwoman, and when I was doing that after 10 years, kind of decided I wanted to do something bigger and help, and attended a summit that CAM did for mayors, and within a half an hour said I must work for this organization. So now what I get to do every day is work with elected officials, work with different groups around the world to try to combat anti-Semitism. So we have a summit every year for mayors, because I firmly believe, not because I was one, but I do believe that mayors, especially of any other form of government, have the ability to effectuate immediate real change, because they deal with our neighborhoods, our streets. They're seeing what's happening, and for the most part, they have a town council of 5 to 7 people to work around instead of the bureaucracy of a federal government or a state legislature. So to me, we can really effectuate change there, and that's what we're seeing. And so we do an annual summit every year with mayors, and then my view is I don't want to say, thanks, see you next year. I want to work with those mayors every single day, which is what I do every day. So I go around, and I also have regional roundtables, and I was supposed to be in Boulder yesterday anyway for a roundtable with Colorado mayors, about 30 mayors, just to go in and talk, what issues are you having, how can we help you, what legislation can we help you do, you know, what are you seeing in your city halls, in your neighborhoods that we can now work with you on. So we were supposed to have that anyway, and then the attack happened. And we said, you know what, this is an opportunity. We have all these people coming anyway. We can't ignore what just happened. There's so much unrest, so much, just so much sadness, so much hatred, so much confusion among not just mayors and Jewish residents, but throughout the whole community, that we're going to come in and in 3 days we decided to do an emergency Boulder summit. That's why I haven't slept and needed that big cup of coffee before. And so in 3 days we got involved. The JCRC, the local federation, ADL, Stand With Us, the Muslims Women's Council, the interfaith leaders, a lot of mayors, all came. We had state legislators came from Kansas and Nebraska and Oklahoma, all to Colorado, to talk about anti-Semitism. We had the Secure Community Network come to talk about security and really just delve into, and it wasn't something like this where we were just asking questions. It was actually me saying, we have an hour right now. Mayors, I want you to stand up and talk about what is going on in your communities. How can we help? And then we had a large group of professionals who were there to say, well, you know what, I can help here and I can help here. And unless we do it all together, we're never gonna make any headway. And so that's what I get to do on a daily basis, and that's the only way I think we're going to succeed at all and move the needle in this fight, is attacking it at every single angle and doing it together.
So Ken, I know that the Brandeis Center sued Harvard, among other schools, back in 2024 for leaving, quote, cruel anti-Semitic bullying, harassment, and discrimination, close quote, unaddressed for years, both pre and post October 7th. Where does this lawsuit currently stand, and what do you hope to achieve in court, other than victory, which I assume is part of it?
we're litigators at the Brandeis Center. That is primarily what we do. So yes, we have cases against colleges, universities around the country. Sadly now also K-12, because K-12 institutions are not immune, but it's seeping into other areas, corporations, labor unions, and even I think ADL also with a cafe in Northern California. The Harvard case, we were able to settle. We've been able to achieve a settlement in which Harvard has agreed to adopt the IRA working definition of anti-Semitism, which is the key definition of anti-Semitism, and this will enable us also to use it to get other institutions to do that. They've agreed to incorporate in their policies an acknowledgement that anti-Zionist attacks are bias that violate Harvard policies. They've agreed to put into place a coordinator on anti-Semitism issues to look for and eliminate double standards, to invest in a partnership with an Israeli institution and education on anti-Semitism at Harvard, and some other things. So you don't always need to win in court. Sometimes you can win out of court through settlements. So our notion in these cases is, yes, win some, establish some good law, use discovery, as we were able to do in Santa Ana, in order to expose the extent of the problem and then drive change. And get settlements that will achieve our ends.
Can I quickly build on one thing
Absolutely.
that Ken said? Because Ken talked about the huge benefit of discovery, and what discovery does in the legal process is it exposes, in so many cases, the rank anti-Semitism that is the intent behind the reason why the law was broken in the first place. So the case that Ken mentioned with Brandeis and ADL against the Santa Ana Unified School District, that was a K through 12 case where a school board was violating public meeting laws, open meeting laws in California, in order to hide an anti-Semitic curricula that they were attempting to pass, right? But the things that were discovered in the process is what exposed the anti-Semitism and laid it bare for not just the people of Santa Ana, but people across the entire state of California to see. And what really kind of struck home to me is when Ken and I got here early today, and we were upstairs at the museum exhibit, and we stepped off the elevator, and I just wanted to bring this up. The first thing that you see when you step off is the wall with the quotes from Hitler, and I took a photo of it. It said, "The Jewish question today was no longer a German problem. It had become a world problem," 1939. In discovery, in the Santa Ana case, we uncovered a statement between school officials that said, "What are we going to do about the Jewish question?" Right? It really drove home for me when that elevator door opened and it hits you, right? And the impact of exposing material like that through litigation helps us rewrite the narrative for the public about what was actually happening behind the scenes. It's so important.
Too often we are assuming good intentions on behalf of people, and we think, well, we're reading it in a certain way, but they must have meant well. Well, with litigation, we often find out, no, they didn't mean well. It's absolutely as bad as we thought.
But can I ask a follow-up question on that? So, my concern with all this and with settling and is that, yes, they're agreeing they're going to do this, but who's enforcing this? NYU passed something saying they were going to, really look at their anti-Semitism laws, actions and policies. Yes, Harvard's going to adopt the IRA definition, but unless it's just a definition, unless it's utilized and actually incorporated and there's actually change made in terms of faculty and administration and significant changes made, who's going to police that and make sure that this is actually done? Because saying one thing and actually doing it are two entirely different things.
Sure, that's fair enough. So the settlements are enforceable contracts so that we get to enforce it if literally they fail to do as they promised. But beyond that, we build structures into it to make sure that on a going forward basis, they're doing the right thing. Those can include things like monitors. So we do have a monitor in the Harvard case, and other structures that work within that. But of course, beyond that, we know that the Department of Justice and the Department of Education and HHS are also focused on Harvard right now. So I think that in that particular case, there's a great deal of enforcement.
Yeah.
I'd also add to that, sometimes like it's also solving an immediate harm that's being addressed. So in the Santa Ana settlement, after a bunch of information that I haven't even talked about yet was disclosed, they had to immediately agree to stop teaching the material in class. They had to disband the committee that was set up in violation of the law. And they have to go back and do it the right way with sunlight if they're going to try to pass a new curricula. And so it stops some immediate harm from occurring. And then it also had consequences for individuals, as there are 2 members that were leading that charge that are now no longer members of the school board.
I guess I'm a New Yorker. I'm just inherently cynical that people just will not ultimately do what they say
And
they're
I
going
was,
to do.
as a,
I'm a recovering New Yorker. I'm a Midwesterner now. So.
well, and as somebody from the opposite end of the state, because I grew up outside of Buffalo, I'm remembering in the 80s, we had a federal judge who was there to monitor school desegregation. Mind you, this is Buffalo, New York. This is not the South or the Southwest. And it had been decades in place. So it's wonderful that you start to do these things, but I hope you're in there for the long haul, because sometimes it's going to take a while.
Yeah, you can't just trust them. You have to build in legally binding, enforceable contractual obligations.
I know.
Yep.
All right. This will be, I think, the final question before we go to question and answer, because I want to give the audience their time to ask questions. So we're going to talk about the internet and social media. We knew we were going to get to it. So anti-Semitic rhetoric and vitriol are rampant on social media, but social media is strange. It can also be used as a tool for spreading the word about anti-Semitism, for educating about anti-Semitism, and for combating it. So it's kind of a double-edged sword. How should individuals respond and react to anti-Semitic content when they see it online? And I'd like some specific strategies, including whether we should be holding social media companies accountable, and can we hold them accountable? And how can those approaches happen? We started with James last time, so this time this is your baby, Ken.
Okay. Although I do think that others do more on sort of social media than we do. So first of all, let me say that people are often asking, what can we do if we're not, we're not this, we're not that. Well, everyone can write. You can write to traditional media letters. You could comment on. You could comment on social media postings by organizations that you like in order, through the magic of the algorithms, to drive it up. You can rebut ones that you don't like. Given freedom of speech, often we litigators have to focus on areas other than social media. But some of the platforms have oversight boards that can take reports of bias and take down various messaging that's inconsistent with their standards. And maybe I'll let others go into that more. But oftentimes, when you see things and report them, you can have them take it down. And again, you can use your own voice to get the truth out.
Lisa, can you, because you do deal with social media a lot through CAM, can you talk to whether we should require social media companies to ban anti-Semitic rhetoric on their sites? And if so, what do you think the legal limitations would be for that?
So, yes. One of the things, we also have a research center and do a lot in that area, and we put out a report about SJP chapters on campuses and how they are utilizing social media to spread hate and to incite violence. And through all of that research, we've actually been working with Meta and have gotten SJP, who owns Instagram also, and have gotten SJP accounts, taken down and stopped, which I think is really important. And I think that social media companies absolutely have to start taking responsibility for hate speech that is on their platforms. And unfortunately, the youth today are getting all of their information from 20-second clips on Instagram or TikTok, and again, not using critical thinking skills. And I think that the algorithms that are embedded in these social media platforms, the number, I don't remember off the top of my head because I haven't slept in a week, the numbers, but the delta between the number of pro-Palestine posts and the number of pro-Israel anti-Semitism posts is huge, because this algorithm is not set to defend Israel or to speak against anti-Semitism. It's meant to talk about genocide and the oppressors, and I think that it's done that way on purpose, and they absolutely have to take credit. And I was kind of one of the only people, at least I know, who I was very excited for Trump to shut down TikTok. I said, this is gonna be great. That, oh my God, they might have to read something, and critically think. And of course, that didn't happen. But I think 100% that these companies must be held accountable for what's on their sites. And in terms of combating what's on there, though, other than taking it through, we can sue Meta, we can sue Instagram, we can sue some of these places as well, but it doesn't, that's going to take a very long time. And to combat what people are seeing is not easy. And I will say that on October 8th, you saw, the Muslim Brotherhood and all of these groups did an amazing job of PR, because on October 8th, all of these campuses, the students, they knew exactly what to do. There were already flags. There was already all of this rhetoric happening, and it's very hard to come at it defensively instead of offensively. I think there are a lot of people doing it, trying to make a difference, but it's really difficult. So I think, talking about it and doing those posts is important, but I think if you're not really focused on the platforms that do this, you're never going to win this battle.
James?
ADL deals a lot with social media companies. We have a Center of Technology and Society. We have an organization called JLens now that currently has a shareholder proposal that we're advocating for with Meta's policies. But it boils down to this, which is speech that very much used to be on the fringes because it was violent or just unacceptable in public discourse has now been mainstreamed, regardless of where it falls on the ideological spectrum. It exists on the far left, it exists on the far right. None of it is productive for society. And social media companies, instead of taking action, have seemed to take a step backwards. So, Meta intentionally discontinued their automated removal of hateful content. They discontinued it. That is a trillion-dollar company deciding, in the face of rising global anti-Semitism, to step aside from the fight. What we actually need is for the large, giant tech companies, so social media companies, to come together, to invest in safety and trust teams, to share best practices, the way that we on this stage share best practices, to coordinate with one another, to monitor what is being allowed or not allowed, to provide buffer zones so that massacres aren't being live streamed on their platforms, or videos or manifestos are not being immediately posted. There are ways to control the system. They are choosing not to. And so whether it's through shareholder proposals for publicly traded companies, whether it's on civil society organizations applying pressure to those companies, whether it is you reporting things about those companies. We all need to play a role. Social media is here to stay. It's not going anywhere. So we have to apply pressure to figure out how to take this system and make it function better for humanity.
Thank you. So we're moving to questions and answers right now. So if those of you in the audience who have questions that you put on your index cards, please hold the card up because staff will be around to collect those. Okay, so this first question, and I am not going to put this in any particular order. I think all of you can speak to this. What can individual people do when they encounter anti-Semitism? Where should they report it? And I think for each of you that might be a different approach. And is any action needed by them once it has been reported? And then the second part of this is, how can individuals feel empowered to combat anti-Semitism themselves, and what resources are there for them? So basically, this is a resource and reporting question.
I mean, I could start with the reporting question, and some of it depends on what the incident is. I mean, the first thing I have to say to everybody here is, if you are witnessing an incident or you are a victim of an incident that is in any way dangerous or violent, your first call should not be to any of us on the stage or our organizations. It should be to law enforcement. Find safety, get to a safe place, call law enforcement. Right? It's the old adage, if you see something, say something. That's got to be your first auto response. Right? Make sure local law enforcement knows. Make sure federal law enforcement knows. We have an incident response portal at ADL. We share our incident database. It's not a something that ADL holds close to the vest. We could only, everyone up here who's working on solutions, right, could only work on solutions when we know the problem, right? And we know the problem when people report it in. So whether you're reporting it into law enforcement or the Jewish organizations or your local city councils or school boards, right? If you see an issue going on like anti-Semitic curricula, you should be advocating with your school board members. Report it into us also, but advocate locally, right? We will be there to support you. So really, it's a case-by-case basis as to the gravity of the incident at the time, right? First and most serious being law enforcement, but right, we have incident reportals. I know Brandeis takes calls in their legal center. Right, I think it's a matter of tracking so we know the problem, so we know how best to respond to the problem.
Anything to add, Lisa or Ken?
No, I think that's right, and it does depend on what it is. If your neighbor is saying something anti-Semitic, yes, that's very easy. Maybe you want to speak and educate them. If it's a school board curriculum, you absolutely want to report that, and you do want to advocate with your school board and try to get, grassroots, get your whole community involved. Again, if it's something very dangerous, don't call us, call law enforcement. Then you can report it to us later, or law enforcement generally does too. So I think it depends. I'm gonna say it depends on the context, but sorry. Always stand up, but you need to know where to, when to do that. Obviously, and I think again, silence is complicity at this point, and I think it's incumbent upon all of us when we see any form of anti-Semitism to speak out. It's no longer okay to not be an upstander.
Since it all depends on the context, maybe I'll say a word about the folks who call us at the Louis D. Brandeis Center, and that's usually students and their parents, although it's increasingly employees or labor union members. It used to be years ago that when someone called us, we'd try to figure out, since we're litigators, do we have a case? Is it a big case? Are we going to make a precedent? Can we help them through lawsuits or not? But we've learned increasingly that when people call us, they are hurting, and there's something that we can do. There's no wheat from chaff. It's all wheat. All of the calls are wheat. If there's not a legal case to bring for whatever reason, we can help people, including young students, to find their own voice in order to articulate the problems that they have in ways that will better resonate with administrators, because they speak not just to their own feelings, their emotions, or their political views, but rather to their legally protected rights and the potential exposure of institutions that do nothing. So at a minimum, we can help people to find their own voice and stand up for themselves. Sometimes, if there's not a legal case to be brought, we can nevertheless speak with the administrators ourselves, if necessary, in order to help them to do the right thing, which some of them would want to do if they have a better sense of what's happening to their own stakeholders, and sometimes we hold the institutions accountable. So there's really no 1-800 anti-Semitism, call this one number and nothing else. You've got to figure out, what is the problem, what is the issue, and there are lots of good groups that can help.
Thank you. This question is for you, Ken. This individual wants to know, regarding the Harvard lawsuit, was there any agreement for Harvard to suspend funding from anti-Semitic organizations?
So I'm trying to think in terms of the confidentiality clause. So we agreed that we could specify certain things that were agreed to, and then we also agreed that we would say no more. So, with apologies, I will say no more.
No more. Okay, that's fine. But I think that may well answer the question as well. So that's okay. The next question is for James. This person would like, if you can, please, to discuss the Berkeley K through 12 anti-Semitic curriculum that asks kids to draw a Zionist.
Yeah. This is both a Brandeis and ADL joint filing with the Office of Civil Rights, Department of Education. And Ken, I can't remember if we filed right before or right after October 7th. I just don't recall. I think it was after. But there were all kinds of issues going on at the Berkeley Unified School District. It led to a congressional hearing by the Education Workforce, the task force. And it ranged from peer-to-peer harassment to teacher-to-student harassment, which certainly made the peer-to-peer harassment much more tolerable in the district, but there were classroom activities. The one that sticks out for me the most, and maybe it's because I was just a parent of a second grader, is there was a second grade art activity where the second graders, and when you have a young kid, you know what little kid handwriting looks like, right? It just said, stop the bombing of babies, right? In kid handwriting, and the sticky notes were then displayed in this art project outside of the one Jewish teacher in the building, and that second grader didn't just show up and write that. It was dictated to them, and that's just one example, right? We have at the higher grade levels teachers leading student walkouts during class. Jewish students being told like you could join us or you could stay behind by yourself in a class. During school hours. There's an ongoing investigation, so I don't want to delve too much into it. But needless to say, right, we saw systemic levels of harassment and discrimination at the K through 12 level at Berkeley Unified, and it led to a joint filing between the Brandeis Center and ADL.
I am assuming that this question is probably for you, Lisa. This person would like to know, what are your thoughts regarding ICE taking into custody the family of the Boulder attacker? And there are legal issues involved, so I would probably speak to those.
I mean, I don't know that I can speak to the legal issues about that. I do think, again, as we've said before, if you are violating a visa, if you are violating the laws of the United States, you should not be here.
Next question, I'll start with Ken on this, I think. How do we change the narrative? How can we sway those that are simply well-intentioned to realize that we're a minority that is worth defending like other minorities here in the United States?
So 24 years ago or so, when I first started working on these issues, I was at the Department of Education, and I asked, in the wake of 9/11, what do we do if a Jewish family comes in and says that we faced harassment? And I was told, generally speaking, we say, we're so sorry to hear that, and you should hire a lawyer. Now, if it was an Hispanic or an African American or Arab American family, the answer would be pull up a seat, tell us what happened. We may be able to assign an investigator, we may be able to do something, and the whole institution's funds are at stake. And when I started asking, well, why is this? And was told, well, Jews are a religious group, not a race or national origin, and aren't protected under our rules. I would say, no, wait a minute, Jews clearly a religion, but what makes you say that we're not a people? Right? That doesn't make a lot of sense. So it's 20 years ago, they made the mistake of putting me in charge of the agency, and I changed that. But I'll tell you, there was an enormous amount of pushback, including from some Jewish civil rights people who would oppose it on various grounds, sometimes saying, now, wait a minute, civil rights are for the disadvantaged minorities, and Jews are doing fairly well. Well, not every Jew is doing equally well. Or they would say, this is really just a religion thing. It's not a civil rights issue. Well, religion is a civil rights issue. Religious freedom is the first constitutional civil rights issue. So one of the first things that we had to do almost exactly 20 years ago was to change the narrative so that there would be an understanding that the Jewish community, while we do have a shared religious heritage, are also a people with a shared heritage that goes beyond that, rooted in the land of Israel and in various other traditions. So that has been a continuing process now for 20 years to educate first federal officials, then the courts, Congress, and others about who the Jewish people are. Now we have to raise public awareness about the horrifying extent to which the anti-Semitism that some of us have been fighting for decades is now at a point where no one can deny it, and it needs to be fought with the strongest tools that are available in the legal and political arsenal.
This question deals with alliances, so interfaith, intercultural alliances that bring Jews and non-Jews together to fight hatred and bigotry. How can combating anti-Semitism strengthen protections for all groups? And I think that, Ken, you can probably speak to that as well, but I think you all have something to say about that. And as the second part of this, what can non-Jews do to be better allies in the fight against anti-Semitism?
I'll try it, but I'm humbled by the other groups that I'm with who've done so much. So there are a few things that we can do. When I first developed the rule that protects Jewish students 20 years ago, it was initially in the context of Sikh students, because post 9/11, some of the same challenges we were facing were absolutely being faced within the Sikh community. And we've worked with other groups on how these protections can be used. So, for example, we have law school chapters. So we've had law school events in which civil rights advocates from the Jewish and African American communities have talked about how Title VI can be used to protect a variety of different peoples. So we try to use the practices that we've developed for the Jewish community to help others as well. And within the law schools, and I'll say at the undergraduate campus, there are many Jewish organizations that are involved. The law schools, not so much, even though there's such a short period of time between when students graduate law school and where many of them might enter into legislatures or judicial positions or other elected offices. We've tried to change the narrative there to demonstrate that if you're concerned about human rights, you have to be concerned about anti-Semitism, including in all of the different ways in which it manifests itself today, including anti-Zionism.
I'll add to that, right, going back to the last question, we can't change the narrative without partners that are willing to change it with us, right? We are still 2%, right, 2%. And so, we're going to need partners. And, ADL just recently partnered with the National Urban League in the working towards the passage of an anti-masking law, right, in New York, so that people can't hide their hate behind a mask, right? That's the Jewish community and the Black community uniting together over a common cause, right, for purposes of safety and security. And we're going to need to continue to form the long partnerships and bonds that are required for progress. It's not an option, and at the end of the day, we're still all in this boat together, right? We are at historic highs right now, nationally, that we've seen in recent memory in the United States, but we also know that anti-Semitism is the canary in the coal mine of hate, right? It might start with anti-Semitism, it's never going to end with just anti-Semitism, right? And so partnering with like-minded organizations and like-minded people across the spectrum is still going to be key. Right? It's no secret, we all felt this after October 7th, that we looked around and we wondered where everyone went. Some of us, it was, where are our friends? Where are the people in our neighborhood that we thought were there to support us? Where were some of the other organizations that we thought were standing behind us? But it's not a time for us to just throw up our hands. This is a time for us to double down and figure out how we reestablish, how we reengage, how we change the narrative to get people to see what's happening.
So I agree with you, but I also agree that we want to partner with non-like-minded people. Because, to give an example, one of our recent mayor summits we had a mayor, I'm just going to call him Mayor Mohammed, and from Michigan, who may or may not have Farrakhan plastered all over his social media. And he signed up for the mayor summit, and it was flagged to me, and we can't have him. And I said, Absolutely not. This is exactly who I want to sit in the room and talk about anti-Semitism and talk about what's going on with the Jews and understand this. And he came, and I will tell you that at the last day of the summit, I said, Mayor Mohammed, do you want to get up and say a few words? And this was like me taking a leap of faith because I had not vetted anything. And he got up and said, you know what? This is the first time I'm understanding what's happening here. I'm going to now interact with my synagogues. I'm going to speak to my Jewish community. I want to understand what's happening. And he did. And then I went back to him recently. I said, hey, are you going to put a proclamation for International Holocaust Remembrance Day? And you know what? He did. For the first time ever. And those are the alliances that I'm looking at. I'm taking a group of 30 mayors from the African American Mayors Association to Israel in July. And because, I went down to Alabama for the Selma March, and I did a roundtable like we were gonna do in Boulder. I did in Montgomery, Alabama. And I had about 50 mayors from Alabama come and talk about anti-Semitism and talk about hatred in general. And we bonded over not just Jew hate, but what, that historically the African American community has been through, and how we had that bond during the civil rights movement, and where did that go astray, and coming back together to understand that we need to battle hate entirely. And so to me, working with those organizations, I don't need to convince any Jew that anti-Semitism is bad. I need to speak to the non-Jews and talk to them about what can we do, how can we change this narrative, and how can we support each other. And I'm seeing that change, and it's a lot of work and it's very hard, but it's very important to partner together and to do that work.
Thank you. Okay, we have two more questions here. The first question talks about the Unite the Right rally and the alt-right, and the fact that that was the segment of American society that was believed to be anti-Semitic, and that was the segment that was really focused upon for quite a while, particularly amongst Jews. But now, particularly on the campuses, what we're talking about is the hard left and elements of the progressive left. A, does the alt-right still pose a threat, a major threat? I suspect I know what the answer is. And B, how do you deal differently with these two groups, or do you approach them the same way? I'll start with James, and then Lisa, and then Ken.
Yeah, violent extremism, no matter what end of the ideological spectrum it derives from, is a danger to Jews and a danger to all of us, full stop. And we attack it with whether it's through advocacy, whether it's through legal means, on both ends. So whether it is our work on campus or our recent federal lawsuits against a neo-Nazi organization called the Blood Tribe, or another white supremacist organization called White Lives Matter, when those organizations crossed over that First Amendment rubric into violent action, ADL took action in court, right? And make no mistake, so if you're the head of a Blood Tribe marching around with swastika tattoos, right, you are still a threat to the Jewish community. Whether you are an organization on the extreme left that is inspiring attacks on our streets, you are a threat to the Jewish community. And it's incumbent on us, whether it's through policy, through working with lawmakers, through bringing cases in court, that we are attacking anti-Semitism and extremism wherever and whenever it occurs, period.
Any additional thoughts, Lisa?
No, I think, historically, we saw that the anti-Semitic rhetoric coming from the far left was not as dangerous as the anti-Semitic rhetoric coming from the far right. I don't think that's the case anymore. I think all the attacks that we've seen lately were definitely coming from the far left and not the far right. But to your point, I think recognizing the signs of radicalization and combating it from both ends of the political spectrum is incredibly important, and we need to utilize everything available to us to do that, whether it's the legal system, whether it's government, whether it's groups that can come in and speak to youth and understand how they're being radicalized and how we can change this. I think we need to confront it on every single front that we can, and unfortunately, it's a problem on both ends of the spectrum, and I don't see it getting better so quickly.
Yeah, we're mostly focused on the left because when we look at universities and K-12 and labor unions, that's where the anti-Semitism is, and that's where the stronger voices are. But on the right, it is absolutely worrisome, even if lately it has not been at the same levels. But we certainly have seen extreme violence from right-wing anti-Semites, and we need to remain vigilant. It's a different set of legal tools. If we're not talking about institutions like universities, we're not going to have certain of the civil rights laws. When we're looking at something like the Goyim Defense League, so often it's state or local ordinances that are involved if they're engaged in various forms of intimidation or harassment at a street level. Oftentimes there's legislation, actual or proposed, dealing with the various forms of you could call it littering, but you're basically plastering a community with different sorts of anti-Jewish hate. Sometimes it's taking images and projecting them on property they don't own. So there are different sorts of legal tools. Prior to October 7, there was a time not that long ago where we thought that groups like that were where we needed to put our resources. Now we've been so swamped by the other kinds of anti-Semitism that the priority is elsewhere. But we know that right-wing anti-Semitism remains a problem. We know that there's a great deal of hate. We know that it's on the internet, and we have to be aware that that can boil over at any time as well.
Can I just
Yes,
build
of
on
course.
real quick on what Ken's saying? Some of our work against those extremism groups, anti-Semitism might be at the core of the group, but some of the legal actions we've taken have been in response to non-anti-Semitic acts. So, for example, when a member of White Lives Matter firebombed a church because the church was LGBTQ friendly, we represent the church in that case. Right? We talked about the Jewish community needing partnerships. We're also going to be a partner in those fights, right? Because at the end, there's this through line that exists. Your question started with Charlottesville, right? And the Unite the Right rally. There's a through line that exists between these hate groups, and that through line is anti-Semitism. And so whether the attack was an anti-Semitic attack or not, ADL is going to be there to attack extremism wherever we see it.
Thank you. Final question. Let's talk about the future. So again, crystal ball time. How can we invigorate the next generation to stand up against anti-Semitism? Because this is not going away anytime soon. Let's start with you, Ken.
Well, the good news is a lot of them are already standing up. I think more so than what I was seeing 5 or 10 years ago. We see different reactions among young people to the increasing problems on college campuses and in K-12. Many of them are scared. A lot of them are hiding their Jewish identity in various ways. Some of them are reluctant even to go to Hillel for services. They're dropping out in different ways. That's many of them. Others react in just the opposite way, and they will lean in more than we had seen before to their Jewish community. I don't want to make stereotypes, but I'll say there are some groups that's maybe even a little bit more true of. So we see that a little bit more among Orthodox Jews. We see that a little bit more among immigrant families, whether from the former Soviet Union, whether from Israel, whether from the Mizrahi community. But in general, I would say I have seen more impressive Gen Z Jews standing up. I've seen more organizations created like Gen Z Jews, Jewish on Campus. Even SSI, Students Supporting Israel, isn't that old. So I think that there is reason for hope when we see a really significant number of leaders emerging from within the Jewish community among people who are still in their teens or early 20s.
Lisa or James, anything you want to add?
So I agree. I'm seeing that as well. And one of the things we did a Rise Up and Respond summit, which had about 1,000 students from across the world came, and we educated them on how they can advocate for their rights within their universities, how they can combat BDS resolutions, how they can try to fight on campus, not physically, and we're seeing the caliber of the students and what they're coming up with and how they're advocating for their rights is impressive, and it's thrilling to see. And I think they're only going to continue to stand up, which is very good. I would like to see at the younger levels in K through 12, I would really like to see curriculums mandating debate and critical thinking skills, because I think that too often now you're seeing from so many students where they're learning things on TikTok, but they're not using their critical thinking skills to understand the differences between different ideologies, the differences on anything. And I think that it's very important, something like debate where you have to understand both sides of an argument and not know what you're going to need to argue when you come in, I think is so important so that we can learn to understand each other and to think in a different direction than what you might initially be inclined to think. And I would like to see that start in kindergarten and go through K through 12 so that hopefully by the time they reach college, they're not so enamored by the first shiny object that comes along, but they can actually critically think about it and advocate for what is right and advocate for their peers. But I am seeing a lot of hope with the students who are vocal now, and I think that, and they're starting to get involved even when they've graduated in groups, and also like the ADL has the great program for up and coming students. I think it's so important to get the young students involved, and then they are starting to look at, I'm going to get into politics, I'm going to advocate with my legislators, I'm going to try to make a difference. And so we're seeing that coming up.
James, anything you want to add?
Look, like everyone else here, I've been heartened by the action I've seen young people step into, not ask for, but be hoisted upon them, right? And I'm heartened by it, and my but here is it's an incredibly tough moment that it has been hoisted upon them. Like 15-year-olds and 19-year-old college students should not be in a position where they have to defend their identity to their fellow classmates or defend who they are in order to be included in a club organization, or to have a debate about why international war policy shouldn't affect whether or not they're allowed into some sort of activity. It's incredulous that they've been put in the position that they are in. And so I'm heartened by it, but I also want us and everyone in this room to do our part in making sure that we're leaving this world a better place for the next generation of Jews. That's what we're all here doing, right? That's why we're all doing what we're doing, so that our Jewish children and Jewish grandchildren will live in a better, safer, more inclusive America where they are not forced to defend their identity as Jews, right? Where they are not forced, when they're not kicked out of a coffee house in the year 2024 for wearing a Star of David, right? It is crucial that we fight back, not just with them, but for them.
Can I add one other
Yes,
thing to that?
of course.
I also think, and we did something that was really interesting, we did a scholarship program for students at historically black colleges and universities. And it was an essay contest, and they had to talk about the black and Jewish relationship or something related to that. And we had amazing submissions. We actually presented at the African American Mayors Association conference. We followed it with a Shabbat dinner with the winners and Jewish students from AEPI and other campuses. And to see these groups of students get together where they may not have ever done that before and really learn about each other and their cultures and see each other as human beings instead of labels was amazing. And I think that that's something we also have to try to continue to foster, is that interrelationship. And part of what we did with this scholarship too is we mandated that every winner has to have at least 30 hours of community service with a Jewish organization, so that they can understand and see and learn. And I think that's something else, that it shouldn't just be the Jews who have to stand up and fight for the Jews. We should be able to incorporate other students and educate so that we can all do that together.
So I'd like to thank Ken Marcus and Lisa Katz, and you as well, Mr. Pash. Thank you all so much. And thank you all for joining us for this series on challenging anti-Semitism. As we have learned through these 3 sessions, anti-Semitism is pervasive, it's nasty, and it's distressingly adaptable, malleable. We will continue here at the museum to educate about its history and dangers, and we invite you to join us in this important work. I hope that these sessions have been informative and serve as a call to action for all of us to combat anti-Semitism, and I wish you safe travels wherever you're heading tonight. Thank you.